Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the special Monday edition of the Friday Lecture Series at the Center for European Studies of UNC's Chapel Hill campus. We're pleased today to have Professor Markus Kaim with us today to speak with us on the topic of NATO, the area of his expertise, which Ashley will get into. He's come to us today from the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, which is a research institute in Berlin, and we're very happy to have him with us today.
Professor Kaim has expertise in German defense and security policy, the transatlantic security relationship, specifically NATO, also defense and security policy of NATO partners such as Germany, the UK, the US, Poland, and France, and also the United Nations and conflict resolution. His current focus right now is on the political parameters of multinational military operations and elements of a foreign policy strategy for Germany, which is a project for the German Marshall Plan. So if everybody would please welcome Professor Kaim.
Okay, thank you for this kind introduction. Maybe for those of you, 3 sentences on the SWP, because it's unusual for a think tank to be publicly funded. Actually, we're doing the things Brookings does, or CES does, or Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. But in the US context, you're more used to private funded think tanks. And we're publicly funded. We're publicly funded by the German Chancellery. However, we are independent, and that's the reason why we're called Stiftung Wissenschaft and Politik. Actually, what we're doing could have been called the Federal Institute for International Relations. But 50 years ago, or 51 years ago, people decided that we shouldn't become the think tank of one particular party or one particular government. And therefore, we have an what's the English word? Advisory board, supervisory board, supervisory board, in which every political party which is represented in the German Parliament is represented in, to make sure that we cover the whole range of policy options. That means also, at the end of the day, that we do not have an institutional position on certain things, which becomes pretty evident, for example, when the SWP is discussing should we intervene in Syria or should we intervene in Libya. We have 3 colleagues in the SWP saying, oh, no, never do this, and 5 saying, please do intervene, or the other way around. So there's no official position of the SWP, only positions of individual researchers. German foreign policy. What I would like to do in roughly 30 minutes is to make 13 points. 5 points, my first part on the question, what role did foreign and security policy play in the federal election campaign? And 8 points about what to expect from the new German government. And actually, when Holger Morov and I were discussing this presentation, I was hoping that we would have a German government, that we would have a finally negotiated coalition treaty to refer to. But we don't have a treaty. We don't have a coalition so far. Therefore, it remains a lot of speculation and a lot of speculation. When we remember what the federal election campaign offered on foreign and security policy, the starting point should be that we had a lot of single foreign policy issues which have been discussed very controversially, and actually you could expect them playing some role in the election campaign. One of them would have been, or has been, the question of arms exports. Under which circumstances is Germany exporting arms to certain countries? Another question would have been, or has been, but not during the election campaign, the question of the parliamentary control of German expeditionary missions, which played, I'm coming back to that later, which plays at least to a certain degree a role during the coalition treaty. Another controversial topic has been Afghanistan after 2014, the German commitment to remain in Afghanistan with NATO mission resolute support, the question under which circumstances Germany is operating in Afghanistan, what are we going to expect in Afghanistan, what is our final goal. Another question has been the assumed nuclear program of Iran. Germany is negotiating together with the five permanent members of the UN Security Council together with Iran. Another question would have been the direction of the transformation of the Arab world. Everything from Tunis to Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria, and so on and so on. I already mentioned Syria. The question, what is the West going to do with regards to Syria? What is the European Union going to do? What is Germany going to do with regards to Syria? And maybe most importantly, what is the German perspective on the future of European integration? The future direction of European integration with its implications for foreign security policy. So actually you had a broad mix of possible topics for the election campaign, but for those of you who have followed the debates, none of them really played a role during the election campaign. It was a clear priority, I would say, again, on domestic politics, like in previous elections campaigns, but I would say under slightly different circumstances. Now we see in political terms the effects of the financial crisis. I'm emphasizing in political terms because it has shifted the attention almost exclusively to domestic politics. I wouldn't call it German isolationism, but actually for the first time in an election campaign we have seen a phenomenon, probably it's exactly the same like here in the US, after several years of being engaged in world politics, after several years of international commitments, now after the financial crisis or with the financial crisis, we see in, let's call it, inward-looking mode in not only in the US, in multiple or in a lot of in many European capitals, and particularly in Germany as well. And it has one clear effect of the financial crisis has been that there is simply no political attention to anything else. I remember from my experience during the last couple of years, every time when we tried to approach decision makers, be it in the executive branch or the legislative branch, and make them aware that there are crises around the world, be it Mali, be it Syria, be it Libya, they told us, we have time for we simply have time for 3 crises at one time, and the 3 crises are euro. There is no time and no space for Libya, for Mali, and for Syria, and that has to do with the financial crisis, and that for the first time has been reflected in this election campaign. Therefore, I think it's the domestic priorities not so new for Germany, domestic priorities of the German election campaign, but now under different circumstances, and that explains also to a certain degree, maybe we're coming to that in the debate, that any external expectations that Germany has to lead in the European context, has to lead the direction, the process of European integration, has to lead also in a wider context, in crisis management in the European periphery, or in very general terms, has to shoulder more burdens in international relations, did not really resonate in the German debate. Therefore, a tradition of German election campaigns with domestic priorities, but in a different under different circumstances. Second observation, at least to a certain degree, we discussed during the election campaign foreign and security related topics, but in a very, I would say, isolated way, and they were mostly read in domestic terms. At that time, we didn't know that the cellular phone of the Chancellor was spied on by the NSA. At the beginning of the summer, it was read not in terms of the whole NSA, let's call it scandal or affair or whatever you prefer, was not read as an issue of transatlantic security relations, was not read as an issue of how to counter terrorism, or what are the appropriate means to counter terrorism, or what are the best means to counter terrorism. It was mostly read as a question of the relationship between the state and the individual. It had nothing to do during the election campaign with international relations. And that has changed only after the election campaigns. Now we have a debate, probably we're going to discuss a little bit of it now with the most recent, let's call it, revelations of the NSA scandal or affair. Now it really affects transatlantic security. Now it has started to affect U.S.-German relations or U.S.-European relations in a wider context, but not during the election campaign. And it really worked, to my surprise, when the Chancellor declared the NSA scandal, or the first part of the NSA scandal, to be over in August. It worked. Nobody really picked up this topic during the election campaign. Third observation: we have a general rule, maybe not only in Germany but also in other countries as well. You cannot win in federal election with foreign policy, but you can lose it. Again, this has been the case with this federal election campaign. If a political party manages to develop a certain, or I start differently. It's never an asset in the federal election campaign if you have a very positive foreign policy agenda with regard, for example, the European integration process. What sometimes has worked in the past. One example would be Gerhard Schröder in 2002 is an anti-program, be against something in foreign security policy. And that explains to a certain degree, in my view, the rise of the AfD, the Alternative for Germany. Regardless of what we think of this political party, it's at least perceived as an anti-European party with a clear party platform. And actually, I was expecting that we would have seen a totally different foreign election campaign if we would have seen the punitive strikes of the United States against Syria at the beginning of September. That would have really been a game changer in Germany, because probably the SPD wouldn't have resisted this opportunity to use against the Chancellor. That would have really changed the agenda, but it didn't. Therefore, another example of not using the federal election campaign for foreign policy purposes. Fourth observation: I mean, we have a tradition in Germany. Those of you who are familiar with Germany know that the major political foreign policy decisions are taken in an not all party consensus, but by 3 or 4 party consensus. That has a long tradition. Western integration was more or less bipartisan to a certain degree, and the major political foreign policy decisions enjoy the support of all political parties, and that in a closer sense characterized also the last 4 years. I mean, the major foreign policy decisions, especially those of them who had to do with the European integration process, the repercussions of the financial crisis, or the new institutions to cope with the repercussions of the financial crisis, all enjoyed widespread consensus in the German Bundestag, particularly an informal coalition of the SPD and the CDU. And that explains to a certain degree why the cooperation of the last 4 years made it so difficult to distinguish the political positions of the respective parties during the election campaign. If you add on top of that the, let's call it the presidential style of the chancellor, the style of politics he prefers, this governing above the political parties, this presidential approach, or some call it unpolitical. If you add that on top of that, it's pretty obvious that from this perspective, or from this angle, foreign security policy wasn't a useful tool to be used against her to throw her out of office. And fifth and final observation with regard to the election campaign, the interesting thing is that in general, I would say, foreign and security policy enjoys only minor importance, not only in the federal election campaign, but in the political system as well. To illustrate it, to give you two illustrations, when I started studying political science 25 years ago, the International Affairs Committee was the peak. The International Affairs Committee in the German Bundestag was the peak of a political career. The average age in this committee was maybe 65. It was a group of elder statesmen and older stateswomen. Today it has changed completely. Usually the young people, the rookies at the parliament, start in the Foreign Affairs Committee, and then if the caucuses allow it, then they move very slowly to a different committee, budget, labor and social affairs, where they are really influential, where they can move something, where they can spend money, and where it's useful for their political career. So a very different perspective, and that illustrates from a different angle that German foreign and security policy has lost importance in the political discourse, and I'm very curious to see how things are going to develop in the next Bundestag, because a lot of those old fellows, those very experienced drivers of German foreign security policy, did not run for office again. They have left office, Hans-Ulrich Klose, Ruprecht Polenz, and a handful, not a handful, 10, 20 others as well. And now we're confronted with a bigger Bundestag and a less experienced Bundestag. And that was, for us as SWP, it will be really an educational challenge, because a lot of them have no experience with foreign and security policy in general, and with in transatlantic security policy in particular. And the second illustration, I was stunned, to be honest. I mean, you know, the tradition in Germany, as well as in other European countries as well, to present during the election campaign shadow cabinet. And the shadow cabinet of Steinbrück, the chancellor candidate of the SPD, there was nobody covering foreign security policy. They had everything: shadow minister for education, for labor and social affairs, for the internet, and everybody was expecting, and now somebody for international relations, foreign security policy, or defense. Nothing. And that reflects also from a different angle how unimportant foreign security policy has become in the political debates. Regrettable, but that's the way it is. What to expect from a new government in foreign and security policy? No big surprises, I would say, given this all-party consensus on the majority of foreign policy decisions in Germany. We all expect a lot of continuity in Germany's European foreign and security policies. It has to do with the bipartisan and public consensus on key external relations. However, we expect some, let's call it, modifications with some, which has to do with the new party political constellations, as well as with the risks and dynamics in the Eurozone and the crisis in the European periphery. The first question the new government is having to answer one way or the other is, let's call it, the level of ambition of German foreign policy. A question which has been postponed by the last government, and the question has been illustrated by the huge amount of expectations which has been addressed to the German government. As already mentioned, it has to do with the European crisis and the European leadership role in coping with the financial crisis, Euro crisis, global debt crisis. But this expectation has been transferred to Germany's foreign security policy in general. And one way or the other, Germany, has to give an answer. What is our level of ambition? One way to answer the question would be the German establishment, the German political class sees it as appropriate to negotiate with the permanent members of the UN Security Council together with Iran. Is this the level of ambition we want to accomplish, or is this our political goal, or is it not? This question has to be answered, and it comes as no surprise that the answer which has been given during the last 4 years, we cannot do this, we cannot do that, is not an answer which is accepted by our partners and allies. And that has been too often the answer of the German foreign policy establishment during the last 4 years. And this resonates not only in our circles, think tank circles, but in a wider audience. Maybe some of you have read read the speech which has been given by the president on Unification Day on October 3rd. He was raising exactly the question of Germany's international responsibilities and used the picture of Germany as a sleepwalking giant. A giant who's simply not aware of his role in international relations, about the resources in international relations, his resources in international relations, and his capabilities. And actually what we need is a nuanced debate, because actually when we talk about the role and responsibility in international relations, or Germany's role and responsibility in international relations, the debate is not fully aware that responsibility has different dimensions. Actually, the German debate usually starts with a dimension which I would consider the last one: resources. What are we going to contribute? Are we going to deploy troops or pay money or whatever? But the first dimension is as already indicated, our self-perception. What is our role in the international system? So it has to do with the level of ambition. And the second one is probably the question of intellectual capabilities or cognitive capabilities, how we are affected by crisis in the international arena, and how we're going to cope with it. And the third one would be the question of institutions to cope with those challenges. And the fourth dimension, that would be resources. And we start usually the debate with the resource dimension and not the question of self-perception and expectations towards us. And that's an open question. If the German government will address this question, I'm hoping it will, because the situation is simply not acceptable anymore that France, Poland, Germany, Great Britain raises expectations towards Germany and was simply not giving an answer, and that has to change in the next couple of years. One big issue will be the future of European integration. It comes as no surprise that all EU policies, or different dimensions of EU policy, will be and should be, for understandable reasons, priority for the new government. Difficult here, I'm suffering a little bit from, or my observations are suffering a little bit from the fact that we do not have a government yet. Some things seem to be clear. in my view, that we will have a banking union, but other things, that we'll have a banking union, that we need better functioning of the European Eurozone, further taming of the financial markets, a growth strategy for the countries in the southern periphery, but nothing more. Nothing more has been agreed on. Therefore, it's a little bit difficult to address the question of European integration. Regardless of the concrete agreements, I think for the first time the political system and the government in particular has to cope with a I'm looking for a particular, or for a precise term. The AfD is not a particularly anti-European party, or it's not a populist party, but for the first time we face the challenge of a political party which is highly critical of the current state of the European integration process, which has left, so to speak, the German pro-European consensus, which has been driving European foreign security policy for the last 60 years. And that's a pretty new challenge, and nobody is really aware or has a solution how to cope with it. From what I'm hearing, a lot of members of parliament, as well as in a lot of members of the executive branch, are very afraid that the party will gain more than 4% during the elections for the European Parliament next year, and will send a group of members to the European Parliament, and then in combination with other populist / anti-European political parties will really make a difference. That's up. It's difficult to say what's going to happen here, and still an open question is if we will see a deepening of political integration. The signals are very, very different. On the one hand, the current government has emphasized the need for new political institutions, for a strengthening of the European Commission. However, a couple of weeks ago, the Chancellor, for the first time, was publicly kicking around the idea of, what's the English word, regaining national sovereignty from the European level. You know what I mean? Without specifically mentioning what kind of or what elements of sovereignty, an idea which resonated very nicely in the British ears. And currently it's difficult to say what has been still part of the election campaign and what is really serious. But the relationship between the German government and the Commission will have to be redefined, and that explains that not only the AfD is redefining the European, let's call it light build of the European integration process, but this light build of the European integration process is redefined by other political parties as well. Other important things on the agenda, I would say, beside the NSA scandal, two major issues for the new German government. First of all, TTIP negotiations, which has just started a couple of weeks ago, and that brings us very, very closely to the whole NSA's espionage activities, because you have probably followed the press. A lot of German politicians try to link the two things and to insert certain parts of anti-spy data protection provisions inside the treaty, but we'll have to see what's happening in this regard. And what has been is on the agenda, I would say, the redefinition of strategic partnerships. One element of the German foreign policy of the last 4 years has been, I would say, a redefinition what is a strategic partner for German foreign policy. On the one hand, it's pretty banal to emphasize that Brazil, China, South Africa, Russia are important for Germany, but the Libya abstention decision in March 2011 revealed that Germany does not have any advantages from voting together with China, together with Brazil, and voting against the traditional allies, be it the US, be it Great Britain, be it France, and other Western allies. Regardless of that, we have declared a lot of countries and regions as strategic, meaning a strategic partner does not really, or the term strategic partner does not really tell us anything about what does it really mean, how important a strategic partner is, and for what purpose he is a strategic partner for German and foreign and security policy. Therefore, I expect, so to speak, a redefinition of what can be accomplished in international relations and with whom, because it's pretty obvious that a country like Germany, globalized like only a handful of other countries in the international system, needs partners to influence international relations, and therefore the question with whom together, it's a pretty important one. And then we have a couple of security-related decisions to make, which brings us very closely to the negotiations about the coalition treaty. One thing is we will see probably some institutional arrangements about arms exports. They will be monitored more closely by the German parliament than it has been the case before. Now the regulation provides that we'll have an annual report after the particular arms export has been authorized by the German government. That won't change, but now we'll have a report at least twice per year, maybe even 3 times a year. So the whole issues will be will be monitored more closely by the German parliament as well as by the German public. If this is really the appropriate measure to constrain German arms exports, we'll simply have to wait. I'm a little bit more reluctant to believe that this really will change things in Berlin. And the second question is how and under which circumstances is Germany contributing to everything which can be related to the doctrine of responsibility to protect. It's a very delicate debate in Germany since Kosovo up to Syria. Under which circumstances are we ready to use military force? And in this particular case, Kosovo we decided to use force in the multilateral framework of NATO, even without the necessary mandate of the UN Security Council. And some people in Berlin address the question: given that the European Union perceives itself as a crisis manager for the European periphery for a couple of years now, we simply, from a German perspective, cannot accept that 115,000 people already have died in Germany without no end in sight. That also has to do with our German history. I don't have to explain to you. So this is simply an open question. And maybe it comes a little bit as a surprise that I got the impression that the conservative part of the German government is highly reluctant to use military force under these circumstances. And with the exception of Die Linke, the more left you move in the political parliament, the more open the members of parliament get, and the Green Party, during the last 4 years, has been the party actually. Some members publicly advocating for a military strike in Syria, but that has been only an exception from the public discourse. Which brings me to my last point. One open question which has to do with Syria and with European integration as well is the future of European foreign and security policy, and in particular European security and defense policy, something which does not enjoy any priority during the last 4 years. We have all the instruments in place. We have all the institutions in place. We have the doctrines in place. Actually, we have the capabilities in place. to make the European Union a more credible, a more effective crisis manager in the European periphery, be it Libya, be it Syria, be it the European neighborhood in the east, the eastern neighborhood. But to a certain degree, or to a wide degree, what is lacking is simply the political will to use these instruments. And on the one hand, we have some members of the government publicly stating that foreign security, the CFSP and CSDP simply is not an effective tool for Germany. Therefore, they do not devote any attention. Therefore, CFSP and CSDP does not enjoy any priority, or has not enjoyed any priority. On the other hand, I think in every political party platform we have the idea of a European army. I mean, it's a long-term perspective, 20 years, 30 years, maybe 50 years. Therefore, we need to address the question: how can we start the process by using the existing tools which are available to the European Union in a more comprehensive and more coordinated way to improve the capabilities of the European Union, because it's pretty clear that either the European Germany will act through the European Union also in terms of foreign security policy, or Germany will lose influence in the international system in general. And therefore, I think that brings me back to the beginning of my remarks. One of the most general challenges, but most important challenges for the Grand Coalition, which we probably will see in the next days or weeks, is to invest more political energy into regaining and rebuilding confidence in the European integration process as a political project, not as a bureaucratic project, as a political project. I would stop here. I'm happy to discuss everything you want. Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. You talked about how Germany is expected to become more assertive in foreign policy questions, for example, Libya. But do you see a tension there between also within European politics and a rising fear of Germany as a resurrected hegemon?
I mean, probably you know this famous speech by the Polish Defense Minister Sikorski. That was the beginning of last year in Berlin. And when he was said, I cannot quote him, I cannot recall precisely his words, but the meaning was he would have never imagined that he would ask Germany to lead. And I was present when he was giving this speech, and you could feel in the room when he said Germany has to lead, and he would have never imagined that he was asking Germany to lead, that a lot of people, Germans, felt very uncomfortable. Everybody said, and that explains in a nutshell the German debate. And my recommendation for Germany, for a German government, would be twofold. You simply cannot escape the expectations you're confronted with. What a lot of German politicians try to do is simply hide and hope that the expectations will somehow go away. It didn't work. But the second recommendation would be to emphasize again and again, when German politicians talk about power, responsibility, international burdens, the subtext always has to be together with others. So nobody's seriously considering about a German hegemony in the European Union. The subtext is always Germany has to lead. Yes, thanks a lot. Together with, and then it might depend on the policies we're talking about. When we're talking about foreign security, we're probably thinking of France, Great Britain, Poland. when we're talking about coping with the effects of the financial crisis, we're probably thinking more of the northern countries of the European Union and not France, Portugal, and Spain. So it depends on the sectoral policies we're talking here. But at the end of the day, we cannot emphasize, we have to emphasize again and again, together with others. And in my view, there's simply not an alternative. I mean, there's no way for Germany to pursue a national foreign and security policy as it has been pursued maybe until 1945. In a globalized world, even for a powerful country like Germany, the European Union is multi-power in a variety of ways. And it makes cooperating in the European Union makes not only Great Britain, not only France, but in particular Germany, more powerful than it actually is. And therefore we have, in my view, a genuine interest in cooperating in Germany. And actually, we're returning under different circumstances to the basic deal of foreign policy of the 1950s. In the 1950s, the deal was, we delegate certain parts of our sovereignty to the European Union to become sovereign. Today, the deal is we delegate more elements of our national sovereignty to the European level to sustain sovereignty on an international level. I think I already emphasized it. Either Germany decides to cooperate with others and to influence international relations with others, or it stops influencing international relations or stops shaping the international order. And therefore, I think although it's a long-term project, I think it's still appropriate and still a good idea that the German government requests or suggests the idea of a European permanent seat in the UN Security Council, which is in this perspective an appropriate measure, knowing that it's a long-term goal and nothing for the next 4 years. Yeah, long answer for a short short question.
Thank you very much for the great talk. It has been one of the constants of German foreign policy that it should be, because of its geography in the middle of Europe, never be isolated in Europe. And despite the fear of German leadership, it seems like there is a legitimate fear that for the first time after World War II and start of European integration and Western integration, Germany is losing this constant because Chancellor Merkel seems to become a new Madame No. I don't want to compare it to Thatcher in many regards, but that seems to be a little bit like that. And my second question is about the UN Security Council and the reform, which is a debate for many decades. Why should Germany pursue an own seat if it's committed to European integration, and why should it not give up the goal and in its traditional sense pursue a common European seat, regardless of the fact that the British and the French will never agree, but why not?
Mm-hmm. I start with the second one. I think the debate about the UN Security Council is, in my view, a typical German one. Insofar as it starts from the wrong end. Again, we're talking about the suggestion centers on an institutional dimension. But the first would be, are we really sure that we want Germany belong to those countries who one way or the other influence, sustain and develop the international order and pay the price for it in political terms, in financial terms, by deploying soldiers, even in physical terms. And the interesting thing for me has been the 2 years of the Germany being non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. We aspired for so long to be non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, but after 2 years, nobody really remembers any major German initiative, anything being left having left a marks on something. And that is, I would say, typically German, that we are so obsessed with institutions, but not with substance. And before Germany aspires again a reform of the UN Security Council, even with a permanent German seat, my recommendation would be to start the debate about, are we really sure? Do we want to be? Is this our level of ambition? And I just mentioned the EU the long-term goal of a permanent EU member seat, I think, which is way more in line with the tradition of German foreign and security policy and the existing framework in which we operate. I don't see that Chancellor Merkel is isolated. I mean, we all know this ugly receptions she has received in a variety of European capitals. As long as she manages to create an impression that one way or the other she has a kind of vision of the European integration process. I think she's still an accepted the person to be addressed to in the European context. I mean, to be fair, nobody's really sure what's her vision, but she's capable of creating the idea or the impression that she has one. Maybe that's part of her secret, or secret of her success. I mean, if you it's exactly in line with the post-election public opinion polls. People have been asked, are you satisfied with the proposals of the CDU party of Angela Merkel with regard to the European integration process? I have no idea what she wants. In general, are you trusting her? Yes. 40–50%, even those who have voted for the opposition say, I'm trusting her. So somehow it works, regardless of the specific details of the rescue packages for the European Union, for the European banks and other measures. But the interesting point will be reached if we really see, let's call it an ugly return of the financial of the euro crisis. If one of those countries, which we all know, Portugal, Greece, Spain, Cyprus, is really, what's the appropriate word? Crumbling again, and then the German taxpayer will have to pick up the bill. Given the domestic opposition, I just mentioned the AfD, the Alternative for Germany. So I expect way more controversies about of her way or her European policies than before, and I haven't mentioned the ongoing what's the English word for it? Those cases which are just negotiated at the German Federal Court. You know what I'm meaning? Yeah, Verfassungsbeschwerde, how to translate it. You know, those decisions by the German government related to the euro crisis, which are now at the argued at the German Constitutional Court. There are a couple of them which have not been decided yet, and that might heavily affect the future of the European integration process in the years to come. And that's really an open question. We simply do not know. There was some question. Please.
So, you touched a little bit on my question, which is kind of two-pronged. One, how much influence do you really see the AfD having domestically in Germany? Because they're not part of the Bundestag, but also with the upcoming EP elections, again, how much influence do you really see them having in the EP? Because even if they send members to parliament, the Eurosceptics have historically had a really tough time organizing themselves into any kind of cohesive bloc. So even if there are more of them, does that necessarily mean that they'll have the influence to be obstructionist in any real way?
I think the attractive, the AfD is attractive insofar because it does not look like the usual anti-European populist parties as we know it from other countries. And they so far successfully avoided all these ugly undertones, anti-Semitic, anti-foreigners. So far successfully managed to avoid this. And if you look at the incomes of those people who have voted for the AfD, the average rate, it's they come right from the middle of the society, and which makes them the AfD so interesting, and from the perspective of the government, so dangerous, because it's not those weird guys who have formed a political party which will simply go away in the next 2 years, like the pirates, probably, which distinguish them, the AfD, very clearly from the pirates. So, in my view, they won't go away. They won't disappear. They turn to, or they can really successfully address to a wide audience, a very, let's call it, unreflected feeling of being uncomfortable with the process of the European integration, in a very general way. Second part, that does not tell us really anything about the influence they might have. Probably a lot of you have read about it that a couple of days ago we have seen for the first time cooperation or collaboration agreements between the Front National and the, what's the name of the Belgian Dutch party? Yeah, thank you. For the first time, an agreement with regards to the upcoming elections to cooperate. Some other European, anti-European populist parties have abstained so far from this cooperation. The AfD has, at least so far, publicly emphasized that they wouldn't cooperate with this political parties, or then caucus in the European Parliament. And this will exactly define their influence. If they manage to overcome their disagreements and their respective differences. I mean, we have some of those parties who are fiercely anti-immigrant, which is not a topic for the AfD, not really. We have, with the Front National, a political party which has, for a long time, had some anti-Semitic undertones, which is not acceptable to a German political party, which is represented in political parliament. So there are a lot of differences among the. They have a common ground on being anti-European as we see the European Union today. But beside that, I see more differences than commonalities, and which makes me a little bit reluctant to believe that they are able to form a coherent, powerful caucus in the next EP.
Thank you also for, I agree with Jakob, it was a very engaging talk. You mentioned early in your remarks that there's a bit of a decline in prestige for the foreign policy portfolio among German politicians. And you also call for Germany to step up to the plate and come up with a cohesive vision for its own role on the global stage. And I wonder if you see the first phenomenon as a hindrance to the second.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. If the majority of Germans, or more particularly the majority of the political elite, does consider foreign and security policy as something of the past, which was important 20 years ago during the Cold War, we cannot expect the same political class to develop a coherent strategic vision about Germany in international affairs, Germany in Europe in international affairs. One way or the other, we're suffering from the success of the European Union and NATO for 60 years now. I mean, German politicians explained to the public after the end of the Cold War, we're encircled by friends. We have only benevolent neighbors, and people start believing it. And therefore, for a wide range of the German public, there is no need to develop a coherent foreign policy or to put an emphasis on foreign policy. I think maybe not the majority, but a wide range of the public feels represents exactly this turn which I described at the beginning, this inward-looking mode. I mean, 20 years ago, maybe that has also to do with a generational change, at least to a certain degree. People who remember the old times of the Cold War at least are open to the idea that that we are still today might be confronted with crises in the European periphery. I mean, I do not mean crisis in the traditional sense, interstate war, but other forms of crises which look different today, more probably uncertainties than really hard security challenges. And they accept the notion that we need to develop a coherent foreign policy, a strategic vision of German foreign security policy. But maybe for a younger generation who grew up in a safe, prosperous West Germany, there's no need to be afraid of any foreign powers. There's no need to be afraid of economic instability, and therefore that's the let's call it the societal background which makes this inward-looking mode possible. Personally, I would appreciate a political class which has a outward-looking mode. But that's the way it is for the time being. But sometimes I would say the political leadership is underestimating its own political role. Sometimes I would say it's simply a lack of political leadership. And members of parliament explained to me, you know, I cannot go to a German to a village or to a small town and explain to the public or to my constituency why we are still in Afghanistan. My counter argument is, but you can explain to them why we have to increase taxes for this or that purposes, which really hurts more than Afghanistan. And usually the answer is yes, it's necessary. And I say, yeah, but in foreign security policy, there are also some decisions, be it Afghanistan or something else, might be necessary. So we see also a lack of political leadership in foreign security policy, which brings us back to exactly your point, the decline of prestige.
If I could ask a follow-up, in that environment, do you see hope for the type of cohesive vision developing somewhere down the line in the future?
I mean, the interesting thing is, I just mentioned, you mentioned in the introduction, that we just finished a project, we, the SWP, finished a project together with the German Marshall Fund, which is, in a nutshell, an attempt to develop something like a national security strategy for Germany. And Germany is one of the few countries which does not have a document like a national security strategy, like in the US, like in France, like in Great Britain. We have couple of other documents, a white book, the defense policy guidelines, but not a document, so to speak, an overarching document, a whole of government document. And for me, a couple of things were pretty interesting during the process. A lot of people had a huge interest in contributing to this project, from a wide range of ministries, from a wide range of political parties. So actually, they were really keen on contributing. And the second important thing was, I would say, in Germany as well as among our partners, we have left a vacuum. Because Germany does not have a document, there's a huge vacuum, and which causes speculation about Germany. What are the intentions of the German government? What are the constraints of the German government? And then you start explaining the structure in which we operate, the internal constraints, the external constraints, and people get an idea of German foreign policy. What I want to say is, I'm realistic about strategic documents of this kind. I mean, you here in the US, I think the president has to present a national security strategy once a year or every 2 years, as far as I remember. Does it really provide strategic guidance for US foreign policy? Maybe, maybe not, or to a certain degree. That is exactly the case in Great Britain as well, in France as well, and will be the case in Germany as well. But it provides some strategic guidance for the political process as well as to allies and partners, which is a good thing. And it created something people complain about that we don't have it in Germany, a strategic community. And my counter-argument is always we have a lot of very brilliant individual thinkers, and the only thing we have to do is to bring them together. With this project, for the first time, we managed to do that. And it receives a lot of attention, and not because we are so brilliant, but because of the vacuum which exists. And I just mentioned, on Wednesday it will be presented in Washington, D.C. On Thursday we're flying to Ottawa, and so on and so on. Again, it has not only to a certain degree to do with our intellectual brilliance, but more with it never existed before. And that tells us a lot about the German approach.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. I was wondering, how do you think the figure of the foreign minister impacts Germany's foreign policy? You had a really weak, in the beginning, foreign minister that got better. The last one, who was still in power, but was still there. But how do you think a new person's going to impact German foreign policy as it has in the past, where we had stronger foreign ministers in general?
Very good question. I think the three names which are just being kicked around in Berlin, who might be the new foreign minister, in my view, are all terrific choices. Either Frank-Walter Steinmeier, one of the best foreign ministers we ever had, or Wolfgang Schäuble, which during his long political career was for a pretty long time the what's the English word for? He was those guy covering foreign security policy for the Christian Democratic Caucus. So he was an expert on foreign security policy, and he's one of the few people who really thought about European integration. One of the key documents for the future of the European integration process, almost 20 years old, was prepared by him. So he's deeply pro-European, not uncritical, but pro-Europe. I would say in a good way pro-European, in a sober, realistic way pro-European. And the third name, which is mentioned all over again, is Ursula von der Leyen, internationalist by outlook, by her own education, with an internationalist outlook. Educated, bilingual. She's born in Brussels, very ambitious, so that would also be a perfect fit. But that doesn't. I think your question probably did not relate so much to the person, but more about the structure and the constraints. And I think the Foreign Office is confronted with two major problems. First, that this general development, which has nothing to do with Angela Merkel, but with development which started at least with Gerhard Schröder, but actually with Helmut Kohl, that the federal chancellor chancellery is drawing all the decision-making power in foreign security policy to the chancellery. First problem. And second problem, which is really a structural one. I mean, we have a Lisbon Treaty, which has been agreed upon by all political by all European governments, which has decreased the importance of the foreign ministers. Now, with the Lisbon Treaty, we have a European External Action Service in place, which decreases the importance of the national ministries. So, at the end of the day, it does not have to do so much with the personality of the respective minister, but he or she is facing with the difficult environment in which he or she has to operate. But regardless of that, I think we have three candidates which all have the political ambitions as well as the public stature to be good foreign ministers.
Anyone else? All right.
Well, Germany is not the only country that has been at the receiving end of anti-hegemonic sentiments. This country has a long history of that, right? Anti-Americanism might just be a gut reaction against any hegemon, as realist theory, and many of you have studied them, would predict. In a unipolar world, you face always alliances against the hegemon. Would you see a parallel? Is Germany somewhat of a regional hegemon, reluctant, sleepwalking, not conscious of it, not accepting this role, but still drawing what any hegemon draws, anti-hegemonic sentiments? In the German case, of course, easily emotionalized because of its history. Recent history, very much in the fore of consciousness, of national consciousness in Europe and beyond. And if you see a parallel, can we learn from the US how to cope with this inevitability, or how they say here, how to suck it up, in a non-offensive way, And is maybe Angela Merkel, her personality, maybe even her gender, and I would say her maternalistic style, even though she doesn't have children, right? But her somewhat presidential maternalistic style, is this maybe an inadvertent, non-offensive way out of this? I would say if Gerhard Schröder had been Chancellor, the Greeks and the Spaniards and the Portuguese and even the Irish, they would have rioted, and he would have made a better cartoon with a little moustache than Angela Merkel. For Angela Merkel, everyone saw it was rather quaint, didn't fly, right? But with the macho chancellor, it would have. Right? But anyhow,
I didn't think about this point, but I think it's pretty convincing. Exactly as you have said, with Gerhard Schröder, and his how to phrase it, this macho style of politics, we would see a totally different picture. Can Germany learn from the US? Probably not, because we simply lack the standing in the international system and the resources. I think it was pretty revealing in the context of the project I just mentioned. We were discussing how to describe the role of Germany in 2 words or in 3 words. And we started from all these things which have been used in the literature before: civilian power, geo-economic power. At the end of the day, we decided for regional power with a global outreach, which is so and so, to be open. Regional power, definitely. With a global outreach, yes, we're affected by global developments. We somehow influence global developments, but that does not really answer the question, is it intentionally? Do we want to influence global issues? But I think the key thing is the term by Joachim Gauck, which you just mentioned, sleepwalking giant. We're so influential and we're not fully aware of that. And I would be very happy if we reach a point in the German debate where every specific debate about certain policies, certain policy decision starts from the assumption of an self-conscious, cooperative regional power. That would be, in my view, the starting point. Again, as emphasized before, always cooperating with others, and that's maybe the major distinction between Germany and the US. The US has learned to cooperate, or has accepted that cooperation sometimes is needed, has its advantages. Germany had no other choice than to cooperate, and it's in our blood, multilateralism, and that's maybe the major difference. And I think maybe it has not so much to do with additional resources. Maybe it has not so much to do with additional institutions, but with proper communication. And given that, I think the distinction you made between Angela Merkel and Gerhard Schröder is exactly one illustration of unintentional communication, because currently she is the chancellor, and regardless of whatever we think about of her and her lack of political vision, I think she's, by her person, by her style, maybe better equipped to accomplish certain harsh decisions in the European integration process, Euro crisis, than others are equipped. Other German politicians are equipped for. Yeah.